I would like to show you two very different approaches to Jonah's whale or fish in art and text. In this engraving from the 1580s, we see a ship in its storm. The people are giving up, they don't know what to do, they are about to die. These people had spoken to Jonah and found out that Jonah had run away from his God. And here in the center of the engraving, we see a sailor tossing Jonah overboard into the terrible waves. And there is a giant fish or whale waiting to eat Jonah up right at that very moment. We see a similar image from the 1100s where we see a sailor hand-feeding Jonah to a terrifying fish. Jonah's feet are facing the heavens and his entire upper portion of his body is already in the mouth of the fish. Now this timing is important. Jonah goes from one terror to another, from the storm to the fish. Let's take a look at a painting from 2019. And in this depiction we see the boat at the top in the terrible storm, and Jonah has already been tossed overboard, and the storm is still going, and Jonah is trying to escape his fate, but there's a shark waiting to eat him. It is just Jonah going from one disaster to the next. In a 1985 book called The Book of Jonah, Peter Spire depicted Jonah in the middle of this fish, and Jonah prays to God. And I'll just quote from that book. Jonah, prayed to God, asking to be forgiven for his disobedience. So Jonah is praying and asking God for help inside the terrible fish. When Jonah is eventually let out, this is why we see depictions of him praying. Here we see in a manuscript from the 1300s, Jonah leaving the terrifying fish with the terrible teeth, and his hands are clasped in prayer. He had asked God to save him from this fish, and he was saved. I love this drawing from the 1400s because just look at the size of the fish's head and check out those horrific, sharp, gigantic teeth that Jonah has just escaped from. And he escapes miraculously with nice clean clothes. But wow, what a horrific fish. The same can be seen here for Jonah's miraculous release from those teeth. And this is on a stained glass from the 1500s. Now for the second approach, the one that I teach in my courses at the Institute of Biblical Culture, as well as the Jewish Theological Seminary in New York. Let's begin with a 1983 statue of a whale in Jaffa, or Yaffo, in Israel, part of what is today considered to be Tel Aviv. Now, Yaffo is the port from where Jonah fled, so this is why there's a whale here. And in this depiction, the whale is not terrifying. It actually is quite happy. It has a nice smile. It's very jolly. So what's going on? Why is this whale smiling? Is this just a tourist gimmick? What's going on? I want to show you two verses. The first one is Jonah 1:15, which describes the exact moment that the sailors tossed Jonah overboard over the ship. Vayis'u et Yonah, vayitiluhu el hayam, vayamod hayam mizatpo. And they, the sailors, lifted Jonah and tossed him to the sea, and the sea stood still from its raging. This means that the sea was calmed before the fish shows up just a couple of verses later. This goes against what we've seen in art, that Jonah was eaten by the fish during the storm itself. In other words, there shouldn't even be a storm here. When the whale shows up, everything is nice and calm. Moving on to a bigger issue, Jonah's prayer inside the belly of the fish is a specific type of psalm known as a thanksgiving, Hebrew Todah. Jonah is not asking God to save him. Instead he says, Karati mitzara li el Adonai vaya'aneni, mi beten Sheol shivati shamata koli. I called out in my distress to the Lord, and he answered me. From the belly of Sheol I cried out. You answered my voice. Jonah is not asking God for anything. His prayer isn't a petition for help. He is giving thanks to God for the kindness that God has already shown him. Jonah isn't in a bad place. Jonah is in the fish, and things are pretty good. With this insight, let's look at some different artistic representations of Jonah's whale. In this Bible from Belgium in the 1200s, we can see Jonah aboard a fish who is really happy. Look at that smiley face. Things are good. And not only is Jonah happy, he can kind of ride this fish like a jet ski and even write his book or read a prayer. Whatever Jonah's doing, he seems to be in a very good place. In this piece from the 1930s, we can see a pretty happy whale blowing out of its blowhole, and we see Jonah praying and happy at the very top. Jonah is doing quite well with his whale. In this sculpture from 2010, we see another almost smiling whale, and now we turn to the prayer. Jonah here is not crunched up in a terrible ball in the midst of the whale's belly. He has ample space to speak to God, and he is able to speak to God and thank Him for all that He has done. I love this 1983 image because here you see Jonah has actually a chair, and he's clothed, and he has a book, and if he has a book, that means he probably has a lamp. So Jonah is really inside this whale, and things are not bad at all. Quite the contrary, Jonah is doing very well. Now we come to the moment that Jonah is leaving the fish. The prayer is over. And this time around, there won't be any sharp, scary teeth like we saw before in the first approach. In this depiction, which comes from the 1400s, it's actually a Muslim mark because Jonah is mentioned in the Quran. What we see is that the fish with no teeth opens its mouth and Jonah comes out, and he is immediately greeted by an angel to give him clothes. In this very interesting illustration from about 1910, we can see that the modern whaling industry has already come around, and we see that Jonah is leaving the whale, and even though it's sad that the people had to cut open the whale still doesn't look too terrifying or sad. Jonah just comes out with a smile and is happy to leave the whale. This next illustration from the 1180s shows a very happy fish and a very jolly Jonah leaving that fish. All is well, no sharp teeth, things are good. But even more remarkable is that the illustrator points out that Jonah is dropped off right at the city of Nineveh. He's right at the gates of Nineveh in Assyria, which means that Jonah is exactly where God wanted him to be. The fish, not only was it not scary, it was also an Uber, a water taxi of sorts, to take him from wherever he was in the Mediterranean Sea all the way to Assyria, where he had to preach to the people of Nineveh. And last but not least, we have the contemporary Fred Aris, whose image here shows a happy whale with beautiful, nice human teeth for some reason. And here's Jonah coming out of that whale and saying thank you very much, as if to say, thank you for this taxi ride, for this Uber. I'm very happy that you dropped me off exactly where I need to be. And not only is he clothed, he's clothed impeccably. So these are the two approaches, the terrifying whale and the one that we see here, the nice whale. Let me know in the comments which one you originally thought, and maybe, just maybe, if this video changed your mind. And like I always say, everyone is welcome to check out my courses in Biblical Hebrew, where you are welcome to join a course which will last 1 year, 10 months to a year, and we will study the Bible in Biblical Hebrew.